This wave is the third. And in the fruit orchards of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Virginia, the third wave arriving on already cold-stressed vegetation at the fruitlet stage of development is the scenario that determines the 2026 harvest before summer even begins. The fruitlet stage matters more than most people understand. After a blossom is pollinated and the petals drop, the developing fruit begins as a tiny green structure called a fruitlet. Fruitlets are more cold tolerant than open blossoms, which can be killed at 28 degrees or slightly above. But fruitlets are not immune. On healthy, unhardened tissue, a hard frost below 28 degrees can kill fruitlets outright. On tissue that has already been through 2 frost events, the damage threshold rises. 30 degrees on a cold, stressed fruitlet that went through 31 degrees 11 days ago is not the same as 30 degrees on a healthy fruitlet in an undisturbed spring. The cumulative injury has reduced the tissue's ability to resist additional cold. Orchard managers in the Great Lakes and Appalachian corridor who have been fighting this spring since late April are walking into this weekend, knowing that the margin between a partial crop and a failed season may come down to 3 or 4 degrees on Saturday morning. For vineyards, the calculation is equally serious. Grapevine shoots across the Finger Lakes, the Hudson Valley, Virginia wine country, and the Lake Erie AVA are now carrying 4 to 6 inches of new growth from the warm spell that preceded this cold wave. Each previous cold event forced the vine to abandon primary buds, which carry the best fruit, and redirect energy to secondary and tertiary buds with lower yield potential. Wave 3, arriving on vines already compensating for 2 rounds of cold damage, threatens to push some of the region's most productive vineyards past the point where the 2026 vintage is economically viable. The character of a wine region's vintage is often decided by a single week in May. This is that week. For home gardeners across the Ohio Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, the risk is more immediate and more personal. Every tomato plant, pepper, eggplant, basil, cucumber, and squash that went into the ground during April's record warmth has now been through 2 cold nights. The plants that survived are not the same plants they were when you put them in the ground. Their cellular integrity has been stressed. Their growing tips may already show damage you have not fully assessed. And now they are being asked to survive a 3rd cold night before the pattern finally moderates. A tomato plant that loses its growing tip in the 3rd week of May does not recover in time to produce a productive summer harvest. The plant can regrow from lateral shoots, but the timing is lost. The fruit that would have set in late June now sets in late July. In the northern half of the country, where the growing season has a defined end, every week of delayed growth in spring is a week of lost production in fall. Here is exactly what you need to do in the next 12 hours. Cover your warm season vegetables before sunset tonight. Not before bed. Before sunset, while you still have daylight to do it properly. Frost cloth, row covers, old bed sheets, even upended buckets over individual seedlings all provide meaningful protection by trapping the soil's residual warmth around the plant. The soil does not lose its heat instantly at nightfall. A covered plant benefits from that slow release of ground heat through the night. The key is to cover before the temperature has already dropped, because by the time frost is visible on the ground, the temperature has been at or below 32 degrees long enough to have already caused cellular damage. Check the NWS frost advisory status for your specific county tonight and again tomorrow morning. Not your state, not your general region, your county. Frost boundaries follow terrain, elevation, urban heat islands, and proximity to water bodies in ways that produce meaningful temperature differences within a single metropolitan area. A city 20 miles from a Great Lake may stay at 35 degrees while an inland valley 10 miles further drops to 29. The National Weather Service issues frost and freeze products at the county forecast zone level for exactly this reason. Know your zone. Check it before dark. For orchard managers, this weekend is not the time to wait and see. Assess the condition of your fruitlets from the previous 2 cold events before Wave 3 arrives. Cut cross-sections of developing fruitlets and look for browning at the seed cavity, the clear indicator of freeze-killed embryo tissue. Know your current damage percentage before Saturday morning adds to it. This matters for crop insurance documentation, for management decisions about water and irrigation, and for honest accounting of what the 2026 harvest is going to look like before you commit additional resources to a crop that may already be below the economic threshold. Here is where we stand. The frost arriving this weekend is not the most extreme event of this spring. The hard freezes of late April that pushed into the upper 20s across the northern plains were more severe by the numbers. What makes this week's frost event dangerous is not the temperature in isolation. It is the position it occupies in a sequence. 3rd wave, 10th day. Already stressed tissue, already damaged fruitlets, already compromised cell membranes doing their best to hold together through one more cold night on plants that April convinced were home free. The old farmer's proverb says 1 frost kills the blossom, 3 frosts kill the hope. The science behind that saying is exactly what I have spent the last several minutes explaining. The cumulative injury concept is real, it is documented, and it is directly applicable to what is arriving this weekend across the Midwest and Northeast. The frost advisory is not a technicality. It is not the Weather Service being cautious. It is a specific forecast for specific temperatures that will do specific damage to specific plants in a spring that has already pushed those plants to the edge of what they can survive. Cover your garden tonight, check your orchard tomorrow morning, watch the NWS forecast for your county through the weekend, and understand that the restless, amplified, cold, warm, oscillating atmosphere that has defined every week of this extraordinary spring does not stop because the calendar says it should be warm by now. It just arrives quietly in the dark. And by Saturday morning, you will know whether you are ready. There's also a dimension of this that extends beyond the garden and the orchard, and it deserves to be said plainly. The northern plains, specifically the Dakotas, Nebraska, and northern Kansas, are looking at below freezing temperatures again this weekend. 29 to 31 degrees in some locations. The winter wheat growing in those fields right now is not dormant. It is at the jointing and boot stages, the critical reproductive growth phases, when the developing grain head is pushing upward through the stem and is most vulnerable to cold injury at the growing point. A freeze during the boot stage does not just damage the current tiller, it kills the primary head entirely, forcing the plant to attempt grain fill on secondary tillers with significantly lower yield potential. 3 cold events across the northern plains during jointing and boot stage, which is exactly what May 2026 has delivered, will be visible in the USDA crop condition reports over the coming weeks, and in the harvest yield data when combines roll through those fields in June and July. The frost this weekend is not only a garden story and an orchard story. For the northern plains, it is a food supply story, and that dimension of it is barely being covered. Let me start with something that happened 3 days ago in central Indiana that did not make the national news. A 4th-generation apple orchard outside of Martinsville, one that survived the 1945 Easter freeze, survived the 2012 Black Saturday frost, survived every cold wave this century has thrown at the Great Lakes fruit belt, lost an estimated 60% of its developing fruitlets overnight. Not from a historic hard freeze, not from a polar vortex. From 31 degrees on the third cold night of May, on tissue that had already been through 2 previous frost events, on an orchard that April's record warmth had pushed 3 full weeks ahead of its normal development schedule. The owner told a local reporter, "It wasn't the temperature that killed them, it was what came before it." That sentence is the entire story of what is arriving this week. Today is the day you need to pay attention. Not tomorrow when the frost advisories get upgraded, not Saturday morning when you walk outside and find blackened foliage. Today, while the sky is still clear and you still have time. Here is what is coming, and why this particular frost event is more dangerous than the number on the thermometer suggests. A reinforcing shot of cold Canadian air is pushing south across the upper Midwest and Ohio Valley over the next 48 hours. The surface high building behind the cold front is dry and dense, which means radiational cooling overnight will be efficient and fast. When you have a strong surface high, clear skies, calm winds, and low humidity, the ground loses heat to the atmosphere at maximum rate after sunset. Temperatures do not drift slowly toward frost. They drop quickly through the late evening hours and reach their lowest point just before dawn, when the surface has had the maximum number of hours to radiate away the day's warmth. Frost advisory range temperatures, the low to mid-30s, are expected across Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, much of Pennsylvania, New York State, and interior New England by Saturday morning. And again, potentially Sunday morning before the pattern moderates. Those numbers do not sound alarming in isolation. They should not sound alarming in isolation. 32 degrees in March on dormant vegetation is a non-event. 32 degrees in May on the 3rd consecutive cold wave, on plants that April told were safe, on tissue that has been cold, stressed twice already in the span of 10 days, is a different situation entirely. And the difference is not subtle. It is the difference between a survivable night and a season-ending one for a significant portion of the agricultural production across the eastern United States. I want to explain the biology of what happens inside a plant during a frost event, because I think it changes how seriously people take the cold advisory numbers. When temperatures drop below 32 degrees, the water in the spaces between plant cells begins to freeze. The ice crystals that form in those intercellular spaces draw water out of the cells themselves through osmosis, causing the cells to dehydrate and the membranes to rupture. When the temperature rises again in the morning and the ice melts, the cell contents leak out. That is the wilted, water-soaked, translucent damage you see on frost-killed tissue. The black collapse of a tomato plant. The morning after a hard frost is not the frost itself killing the plant in real time. It is the cellular rupture from the previous night becoming visible as temperatures warm. Now understand what happens when that process occurs twice. When a plant survives a frost event, some cells are damaged and some survive. The surviving cells attempt to repair the plant. New growth produced after the first frost event is not cold, hardened at all. It is the most vulnerable tissue the plant has produced all season, growing in the assumption that the cold is finished because it arrived after what felt like full spring warmth. When the second frost wave arrives on that new tender growth, the damage threshold is lower than it was for the first event. What was a non-damaging 34-degree night in April becomes damaging in May on tissue that has already been through one cold event.